Well, God bless the great state of South Carolina. Well, and I love you back. It is a blessing to be with so many friends. Let me say to Scott Cooper, thank you for your hard work organizing this group. Frank Gaffney, the one and only, you are a clarion voice for truth. And there are a lot of good friends who have come here today, including Alan Clements, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Connor, Javen Browder, Joe Dugan, and so many more. It is great to be with you. We're here tonight talking about the threats to America and across the world. We have to start by being clear about who and what it is we're dealing with. There are many challenges to America across the globe. Putin's Russia, an authoritarian China, and hostile regimes in the Western Hemisphere from Venezuela to Cuba. But even with all of these wolves around the sled, as General Mike Flynn would say, radical Islamic terrorism is the greatest threat to the United States today. And that is, of course, what we are gathered here to discuss. Candidly, openly, truthfully. The threat has many faces. On the Sunni side, we have ISIS, which is so vicious that some are now suggesting that Al-Qaeda might, by comparison, be a more moderate partner for America. How through the looking glass have we gone? But the trunk of the poisonous tree is and remains the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is Shiite rather than Sunni, but shares the very same antipathy towards freedom, modernity, and the West. And it is an antipathy so violent that they are compelled to try to destroy America and her allies. For 35 years, the leaders of Iran have made their intentions clear through countless acts of terror. Kidnappings, bombings, attacks on our soldiers. Even in 2011, an attempted attack on the ambassador to the United States from Saudi Arabia, which was sadly hatched in my home state of Texas. A few weeks ago, a courageous prosecutor from Argentina, Alberto Nisman, died under highly suspicious circumstances just hours before he was supposed to present new evidence of Iranian complicity in the 1992 bombing of a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires. Iran actively supplies, trains, and funds the designated terrorist organizations Hamas and Hezbollah, which are dedicated to the destruction of our dear friend and ally, the nation of Israel. This relentless campaign has earned Iran the distinction of being the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. These are not events from the distant past. They are happening today, right now. There is no reason to think that Iran has any intention of modifying its behavior, and plenty of reason to believe that their intent is to continue and to expand their terrorist activity. There is also great reason to believe that the Islamic Republic of Iran has been pursuing nuclear weapons capability for 20 years. First with the help of A.Q. Khan, and then with Russia's assistance. A decade ago, we discovered the uranium enrichment plant at Natanz and the heavy water plant at Iraq. Just last month, the IAEA released a report documenting Iran's ongoing refusal to answer the agency's questions about its nuclear program, leading a European official to wonder, according to the New York Times, if it, quote, makes sense to lift the sanctions before Iran satisfies the inspectors. This was an EU official, quoted in the New York Times. One could only hope and pray that the Obama administration would demonstrate half of the skepticism. And yet the Obama administration's approach to Iran has been a profound failure. The reality about Iran makes it all the more confounding that the Obama administration has displayed no skepticism. Instead, a sunny optimism that they could overcome decades of relentless hostility through diplomatic outreach. As a candidate, Obama promised negotiations with no preconditions, one of the few promises on which he's delivered. During the transition, the idea of a special envoy to Iran was floated. In the first few months in office, President Obama traveled to Cairo to proffer his outstretched hand if, as he proposed in his first inaugural, Iran would only unclench its fist. The mullah's rejection of the charm offensive was made abundantly clear just days after Mr. Obama proclaimed a new beginning in June of 2009, when the Iranian people poured into the streets to protest the highly suspicious re-election of Iranian President Ahmadinejad. The Iranian authorities launched a brutal clampdown. Protesters demanding freedom and crying out for America were shot in the street. The administration said nothing, and instead let the mullahs do as they please. Hillary Clinton has subsequently written that she came to regret, those are her words, standing by silently as the protest was crushed. But neither she nor anyone in the administration has demonstrated any understanding of the opportunity we had then to finally see regime change from a radical regime dedicated to the destruction of Israel and America. Instead, the administration doubled down on their bet that Supreme Leader Khamenei would prove a reliable partner for peace, and that Iran could be dissuaded through negotiations to stop their decade-long pursuit of nuclear weapons capability. 16 months ago, the administration launched direct talks with Iran under the extremely lax terms of the so-called Joint Plan of Action. Terms by which Iran is compelled to dismantle not a single centrifuge or to relinquish even a single pound of enriched uranium. In exchange, Iran has received significant economic relief. During the many meetings in Geneva, Vienna, Paris, Lausanne, over the course of not one but two extensions, the JPA has failed to produce even a single meaningful concession from Iran. The American position, meanwhile, has dwindled to the point that the JPA appears to be the high water mark, and the best we can hope for now is a phase out of its terms. This is the very portrait of what Prime Minister Netanyahu predicted would be a, quote, very, very bad deal, an historic mistake when the JPA was first signed. Indeed, when Prime Minister Netanyahu came to Washington just 2 weeks ago to plead with President Obama one final time to stop this madness, the response from the White House was to refuse to meet with Israel's prime minister and to launch a relentless campaign of ridicule and attack, manifesting right now in President Obama's national field director helping run the campaign to defeat Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel in coordination with a nonprofit group that has received hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars from the American taxpayer. What does it say about the President of the United States when he's more concerned about undermining and attacking the Prime Minister of Israel than he is standing up to the mortal threat a nuclear Iran poses? As I sat on the floor of Congress listening to Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech, I could only think we were hearing echoes of history, that this is Munich in 1938 all over again. And I will say the adjective that has been most frequently applied to Netanyahu's speech was Churchillian. Because he speaks with a simple gravity and clarity that it is my hope and prayer both the members of Congress and the American people listen to the words of our friend Prime Minister Netanyahu. Galvanized by the heroic speech, 46 senators joined Senator Tom Cotton in sending a letter to the nation of Iran. The 47 senators together informed the nation of Iran of how our constitutional system works in this country. That the President of the United States lacks the authority to unilaterally make law. And that any agreement President Obama reaches with Supreme Leader Khamenei will not be binding on the United States unless and until it is ratified by the Senate as a treaty or passed into law by the United States Congress. Now, the response from the White House, the response from Democrats, the response from the mainstream media, although I repeat myself, has been a hysteria that recalls the bard, methinks she doth protest too much. You know, it used to be that we didn't have to worry about presidents disregarding the Constitution. That was considered a basic job requirement. And yet this is a president who has over and over again indicated his willingness to circumvent Congress, to circumvent federal law, to circumvent the Constitution. And to understand the gravity of what the Iranians believe, let me quote Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif. who said in response to our letter, "The authors may not fully understand that in international law, governments represent the entirety of their respective states, are responsible for the conduct of foreign affairs, are required to fulfill the obligations they undertake with other states, and may not invoke their internal law as justification for failure to perform their international obligations." Now let me give a response to Foreign Minister Zarif. Sir, you are flat out wrong. In the United States of America, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And no president has the authority to unilaterally change American law or bind subsequent presidents or subsequent Congresses. President Obama may indeed have a pen and a phone, but the next president is going to have an eraser So in response to this, the Obama administration has hatched their new plans as the rumors swirl Washington. They're going to go instead to the United Nations, because so much good has historically come of that. And apparently the administration and Iran together think if they just go to the UN Security Council, then they can circumvent the Constitution and Congress and the American people. They are mistaken. And I would like to note this is a topic on which I have some experience. Before I was in the United States Senate, I served as the Solicitor General of the state of Texas. And I had the privilege of litigating before the U.S. Supreme Court a number of cases, including one called Medellin versus Texas. Medellin began with a horrific crime in my hometown of Houston, where two teenage girls were tragically gang raped and murdered. The case took a very, very strange turn because the World Court, the judicial arm of the United Nations, issued an order to the United States to reopen the convictions of 51 murderers across this country. It was the first time in the history of our country a foreign court has tried to bind the U.S. justice system. Texas stood up and we fought the World Court. We went to the United States Supreme Court, and on the other side was the United Nations, the World Court, and over 90 foreign nations. Every one of them made the exact same argument Foreign Minister Zarif made, that international agreements, international law is binding, and your domestic law does not matter. Texas stood up against them, and the Supreme Court concluded 6-3 that neither the United Nations nor the World Court can bind the United States of America. And God bless South Carolina. Both states that have a long history of producing patriots. But you know, the Medellin case didn't end there, because you might say, well, gosh, today it's not just the World Court, it's not just the United Nations. Today, now it's the President of the United States. I'm sorry to tell you, in Medellin, the President of the United States signed an order that attempted to order the state courts to obey the World Court. And I'm very sad to tell you that president was not Barack Obama. It was George W. Bush. Now, I'll tell you, when that happened, I sat down with my boss, the Attorney General, talking about what to do. And George W. Bush, I believe, is a good and decent man. And he was a Texan. He was our state's former governor. He was a Republican. And yet, in this matter, he received some very, very poor advice. And I'm proud to tell you, on behalf of the state of Texas, I went before the United States Supreme Court and said no president of the United States, including a Republican, has the authority to give up U.S. sovereignty. So President Obama may try to go to the United Nations, but it's not going to change the law in the United States of America. So what are the consequences of all of this? Well, unfortunately, one of the gravest consequences may well be that President Obama succeeds in getting the United Nations, getting for our allies to dismantle sanctions against Iran. That seems to be what the administration is doing. It is doing it because, by all appearances, it is pursuing a political agenda. The beginning of President Obama's second term, his Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, said that an Iranian nuclear deal would be the Obamacare of the second term. I think he meant that as a compliment. If this president succeeds in dismantling international sanctions, what that will do is strengthen Iran and weaken America. What that will do is accelerate Iran towards acquiring nuclear weapons. And what that will also do is substantially increase the risks of military conflict. If President Obama dismantles the international sanctions regime, the next president will come in with a far weakened hand, with many fewer tools, without the world alliance against Iran. That means if the next president discovers an Iran on the verge of acquiring nuclear weapons capability, the only tool available to the next president may well be a military attack. It's one of the things that has been missing from day one of the Obama-Clinton-Kerry foreign policy, is an understanding that weakness is provocative. Appeasement doesn't work. In America, we've always believed in peace through strength. I've introduced legislation in the United States Senate that would immediately impose and reimpose full sanctions on the nation of Iran. That would ratchet them up to make them even more debilitating. And then lays out a clear path for how Iran can lift the sanctions. To lift the sanctions, Iran must disassemble every one of the 19,000 centrifuges it has built. It must hand over every pound of enriched uranium. It must disassemble its ICBM program, which exists for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to carry a nuclear weapon to the United States of America. That is how we should be approaching Iran, with far more stick and a lot less carrot. Beyond that, we are stepping into the season where this country begins the process of selecting the next President of the United States. South Carolina is going to play a critical role in that selection. South Carolina historically has played a critical role in the selection in the Republican Party of ensuring that we nominate a strong conservative who will stand up and defend America. And a question I will suggest that should be posed to every candidate for president, whether Republican or Democrat, is if President Obama enters into an agreement with Iran that undermines our national security and increases the likelihood of Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon, will you as president abrogate that agreement on day one? Any president who is not willing to put the United States Constitution and the national security interest of our country above an ill-advised and foolish agreement with so-called Supreme Leader Khamenei is not fit to serve as Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America. Why did the Democratic establishment squeal so loudly at the letter of 47 senators? Because it indicated people understand we've got 21 months of damage this administration can continue to do to this country and to the world. But come January of 2017, there will be a new resident at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I want to simply give you some words of encouragement. It's dire. The threats are grave. And yet America has weathered grave threats before. When this great nation declared independence in 1776, the notion that a ragtag bunch of colonists might defeat the mightiest army on the face of the planet was absurd. And yet, with God's providential blessings, that's exactly what we did. When the Civil War ripped this great nation apart, pitting brother against brother, as gallons of American blood spilled on this soil. For most nations, that battle, that horrible conflagration, would have destroyed them. And yet America came together and restored the Union as one nation under God. In World War II, when we faced the unspeakable evil of the Nazis, again, America rose to leadership. And with God's providential blessing, defeated the face of evil. In 1979, we similarly had a president in the White House whose feckless foreign policy had made the world far, far more dangerous. We similarly were dealing with a bellicose Russia and an Iran declaring war on America and indeed seizing Americans as hostage. And yet, I want to point to you the words of Ronald Reagan sometime later. As Reagan recalled, I called a meeting of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, our military leaders. And I said to them, every offensive weapon ever invented by man has resulted in the creation of a defense against it. Isn't it possible that in this age of technology, that we could invent a defensive weapon that could intercept nuclear weapons and destroy them as they emerge from their silos. So SDI was born. And very shortly, some in Congress and the press named it Star Wars. If I had to choose the most important reason on the United States' side for the historic breakthroughs that were to occur during the next 5 years in the quest for peace and a better relationship with the Soviet Union, I would say the Strategic Defense Initiative, along with the overall modernization of our military force and the revival of U.S. economic power, would be front and center. We have rebuilt our military before. We have stood up to evil before. We have developed technology and missile defense and implemented it alongside our allies such as the nation of Israel once before. We have revived our economy so the engine of American free enterprise bankrupted the enemies of freedom. We've done it all before, and we can do it again.